Okay, we're back with Barbara Jean. Mom, I always loved the Big Mama Thornton, you ain't nothing but a hound dog story you told us forever. So why don't you tell everybody the story?
It begins when I was in kindergarten. As a kindergarten person, I was like a star in the back of the school. And I would do, have you ever passed the corner of 4th and Grand? There's a little boy has a shoe shine stand. People turn around and they clap their hands, and I would tap dance because my sister was a tap dancer. I wasn't, but Daddy bought me some tapping shoes, and so I became a star. I became a star in kindergarten. So about 8 years old, Daddy made big gardens. So
Well, you said in kindergarten though you people would pay you a nickel
they
to do
paid me
that.
a nickel. I could pull my finger back. I was double jointed, and I would sing and I would tap dance, and they would actually pay me then for just. I was just a star.
So you made money in kindergarten
Right,
just doing
right,
odd
right,
things and
right.
singing for people and
And
stuff.
so I knew, and then I was the most popular girl all the way till high school.
So you knew you'd be a star in
Right,
kindergarten,
right,
right?
right. I mean, I was. So anyway,
Okay.
and my sister owned the grocery store in town, and I was kind of like uh, Miss High Society, but I wasn't. But anyway, we'd all go to her store, and okay, all right. So now, Daddy would make a garden. I was 8, 7, 8, 9, and Anita Baker, the best black blues singer, was singing Tweedly Dee, Tweedly, 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 and then she'd do hearts made of stone do the water. And I'd get into that in that garden. Okay. Then Big Mama Thornton was getting on to you ain't nothing but a hound dog. So I would get in there and my neighbors would say, go for it. And all, we had workers in the garden and they'd say sing loud. And I'd go, you ain't nothing but a hound dog. That's how she started out. And she could sing it a lot better than Elvis Presley ever thought. She was the uh, hound dog woman.
So in y'all's household, "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog" was a Big Mama Thornton song.
Right.
It was never considered an Elvis
Well,
song.
Elvis wasn't even around.
No, but even when Elvis was around, when you heard "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog,"
It
that
was
was Big
Big
Mama
Mama
Thornton.
Thornton.
Nah, that was just Elvis did it again.
He
But
could never copy her.
okay, now when you were in the fields singing this for people, how old were you?
I was 8, 7, 8, 9.
So you'd help your father out in the fields with all the workers they had, and for their amusement or their enjoyment,
I
they'd
would
have this
sing.
little Barbara Greer out in the field sing the Big Mama Thornton song.
Okay,
Sing a
so
few bars for us real quick.
you ain't nothing but a hound dog, oh, you rocking all the time. You ain't never killed a rabbit. You ain't no friend of mine. Well, they said you were high class. Honey, that was just a lie. You know, she get into
Yeah.
it. Well, you say you were high class. Honey, that was just a lie. You ain't never seen a rabbit. You ain't no friend of mine. And the band would cut loose like you've never heard. And
And
that's what I would play like
I
I.
bet the workers your dad had in the field, I bet they didn't know what to think of
Daddy would say,
this crazy little
she's one
girl.
of a kind. I
Yeah.
don't know what she is. Then,
But they didn't know what to do with you
okay,
back
so
then.
now, all through school, everybody thought I ought to go to Nashville. Then Brenda Lee came around. And Brenda Lee was singing,
What did she sing?
anyway, I was singing her songs, and they'd say, you have got to go to Nashville. I said, listen, she is so miserable on that bus and telling everybody they're taking her money. They're not really paying her. I said, if you thought I was going to be a Brenda Lee. Well, here I am. I become cheerleader in the 4th grade. I mean, the 8th grade junior high cheerleader. Then I started
This
doing
is
acts,
this is in the early 50s at this
Yeah.
point, early to mid 50s.
hmm
Okay.
And then I was singing cheerleading, but then I'd sing them a song, practicing cheerleading at school. Then I become senior high cheerleader at 16, and this was a killer. So we go to Nacogdoches. I am a spoiled brat. Mama brought me breakfast in bed. I didn't know how to rough it. So here we are in cheerleader camp, and you weren't a cheerleader, you were going to be a cheerleader. And they worked you like they do in the army. They made me take so many laps, and they called me and my girlfriend out. Her name was Betty Lou, and they said, whoever told y'all were cheerleaders? We were so bad. There were 600 cheerleaders and 900 college students. And they said, I said, well, we were popular. That's how we got cheerleaders. We couldn't cheer. Well, when I got home, Daddy said I got all my money's worth. He had paid $70 for me to take the cheerleading course. He said, "You're a cheerleader." But anyway, I thought I would. So we got there on Sunday. My brother and my mother took us in his new Oldsmobile to Nacogdoches. And when I got there, we were miserable. And then Wednesday, they said, okay, we're going to have a talent show Wednesday night. We had all brought a pretty dress because we knew there was going to be something special on Wednesday night. Well, there was going to be a talent show. So they had a beautiful head cheerleader that, was a teacher. And she brought us in there. She said, well, what is y'all's talent? Our cheerleader. We said, we don't have any. And my girlfriend, Linda Bailey, says, my gosh, Barbara's always singing all them Carter sisters, Foggy Mountain Top, and don't know the words, but she drives us crazy. Oh,
So you sang a lot of the Carter family songs
right,
when you were a
Foggy
kid.
Mountain Top, and I don't know, I just did everyone. Everyone that had a new song, I sang it.
But you were a big fan of the Carter family.
Oh,
when you
yes,
were
yes,
kids.
yes. And so, the head cheerleader says, Barbara, would you do a song? I said, well, now, Teresa Brewer was very famous now doing uh, uh, Sweet Old Fashioned Girl and another one, and I can't remember that song.
Sing a few bars of Sweet Old Fashioned Girl.
How would anybody like to meet a sweet old fashioned girl? Scoobily dooby doo. You're the finest little baby in your bobby socks. Oh, I know, my little girl, I love you a lot. And my voice was so high then. How would anybody like to meet a sweet old fashioned girl? Then she said, oh my gosh, she said, you're going to get a standing ovation. And my girlfriend said, oh, she's not. I said, I might be more talented than you'll think. So she says, would you do a blues? I said, oh, well, a good man is hard to find. And I forget who sang that
Now,
one.
how old were you at this point?
16, cheerleading, junior high.
Gotcha.
In my I said, oh, well, a good man is hard to find. You always get the other kind, but if you think he's your man, you look around and find him running around some other man. Well, then you slave, you even crave to see him lying there in his grave. So if your man is nice, take my advice, and I'd go, hug him in the morning, squeeze him every night, and the crowd. So then she said, well, Barbara, you got to do one more because you're going to get 3 standing ovations. Well, all of us started crying. They said, oh, we always thought she was famous. I said, no, I'm not. I said, and I told the lady, I said, I got a new body curl. My hair was, I said, I can't do it. She said, yes, you can. When I got on that stage and just started singing, I started off with the blues. She made me start off.
So this would have been about 1956.
You're right, 1956. And so I got standing, screaming, mobbing they were just screaming and just stomping like Elvis Presley before Elvis Presley. So then, that was Wednesday night, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, instead of a cheerleader, I was a star. Everybody was coming to my room. They would take my autograph, pop me popcorn. Well, I couldn't stand it. I was so hyper and so wound up. I got the girls together on Saturday. My mother and my brother that brought us there were coming to pick us up. And I said, I want to ask y'all one favor. Everybody always wanted me to go to Nashville. Well, of course I'm not. And I said, but we're never to tell what we saw. Please. They cried, we cried, and I said, I'm just going to tell y'all, we will never repeat what y'all saw here. We let it go. Then, years later, my girlfriend had beautiful homes, and she'd invite me into her home, and I would sing, and her name was Shirley Adams, and she'd say, Barbara, we have to do something about you. She'd say, I'm going to promote you any kind of way I can. And I'd say, no, you're not. And that was my life. Well, then we had Gasper's Nursing Home opened up in Port Acres, down the road from my house. Well, the activity director says, Barbara, would you start coming on Tuesdays to have birthday parties every Tuesday? Well, I started going, and then it got so bad. Now I am now 31 or 32 in the 70s. And I said, one day I said, I can't do this. There's no way I can do it. Well, uh, I was in a real sad mood, and Velma was the the owner, and she said, Barbara, there's a young woman in a room, and she had her legs amputated, and she'd like to know if you would sing Jolie Blanc, a French song for her. I went in there and I said, lady, are you never going to get out of here? She said, no. I said, how old are you? She said, 40, 41 to 46. I said, you're permanently in here? She said, yes. She said, could you tell me what what these flowers are outside the window? And I said, well, my mother-in-law told me they were buttercups. And I was so sad, I thought I might die by the time I got through. So I went outside, and some young boy says, so then I started singing What's Your Mama's Name, Child by Tanya Tucker. So this young guy says, you have to meet my uncle in Louisiana. He has a recording studio. I said, sir, not only am I not going to meet your uncle, I'm going to take this guitar outside and I'm just going to tear it up by my car. I cannot do this. I cannot come to nursing homes. They're killing me. So then I was so sad. I went home, and my son was sitting at the bar. His name's Joe Greer. He was sitting at the bar. And I said, son, this boy asked me to record. And I said, I'm so sad. You and Daddy have got to make up your mind that I cannot go to a nursing home. My heart can't take it anymore. And he says, Mama. So I said, let me tell you some words to a song. He said, Mama, get in your room and write down what's on your mind right now. I said, well, I forgot what I said. He said, go in there, and whatever is on your mind, do it. So in 10 or 15 minutes, I wrote Little Lonely Old Folks.
So
It poured out of my body. It just poured out. And what it was is when I'd go, these people would not let me leave. They'd have the boys in wheelchairs or something. They'd close the door. They'd say, you can't leave. And then some of these,
because they just loved you so much.
oh, it was, so this one accountant, he would say, Barbara, I'm not crazy. I'm in here because I have no place to go. But he said, if you were in nursing homes, no one would ever have to have a pill. You just, so that was so touching. Okay.
So that's the story.
No,
of
wait,
you.
I'm not through. So then, my two sisters told me they were going to give me $15 apiece to go to Houston and record this, and they wanted 500 records, and they knew they were rip-offs for the whole town. And I agreed, and I went. And when I got there, it was me and my husband and my mother-in-law, and Freddie Fender's band had arrived from San Francisco, and Freddie Fender was going to be there a little later. And one of the harmonica player says, uh, you're paying $3,000 for 500 rip-off records? I said, yes. And I have one cut. They will not let me. They said, no, we're getting behind you. So they got behind me, and they're on my Little Lonely Old Folks song that I wrote. And apparently they felt what I was singing, because I could hear now that they were into it.
Okay, so that's the story of Little Only Old Folks. We'll stop right here, and we'll talk more in our next visit about the recording of your songs in the 70s, and we'll talk more about your album. But say goodbye to everybody, Barbara.
Goodbye. I love you.